Chris Sims said on his podcast, Unbuttoned, with our buddy Ahmed Fareed. And the first thing, he's going to start by talking about last year, why his initial take was play Trey, and then he watched him play in the preseason and went, maybe he's not ready, but why his opinion is different now.
People around the 49ers organization and training camp last year, or people around the Chargers 49ers practices during training camp last year, too many people got to see Trey Lance to go, it wasn't that good in practice. And there was too many things coming out of those to go, it's really raw. He's really far away. The throws are off target. The decisions are everywhere and all of that. I would say this. Shanahan said a few weeks ago that they think Trey Lance is going to start. He's ready. All right, he's ready. He is. I know they're going to play this dance if Jimmy G's there or not. Just go with it. You saw enough from him, and he's got some talents that can open up the field and make their offense every bit as dangerous. Now, is he going to be as consistent throwing the ball machine down the middle of the field? No, probably not. But I just think the Jimmy G situation brings more pressure on Trey Lance. It brings more pressure on Shanahan, and that's where I just don't understand.
I guess I cut that off there, but that's where I just don't understand why they're dragging this out, or essentially is what he said.
Yeah. I think in their mind, they're not necessarily dragging this out because he's not going to be around Trey. I would say the only way that you would consider this dragging it out is if when training camp comes, Jimmy's also showing up. Then that to me would fall under. But what's happening this spring with Jimmy not being around and Trey going to be the starting quarterback, I'm going to give them a little bit of a pass. Not that they handled it well. I think we've all agreed that it did not go their favor. And even John admitted the moment that they came out with the getting surgery, like that screwed him. Even though they kind of knew that he might get surgery, is a weird deal. But regardless,
Sims, I don't have that. Sims reiterated, like, it kind of snuck up on them that it turned that way. And John Lynch has kind of said that too.
They clearly weren't on the same page there. Which I don't blame Jimmy. Like I'm a huge that was Jimmy's leverage. Yeah, like Jimmy got hurt playing for you guys.
Yep.
But do you agree? Like if Jimmy's nowhere to be found when we go out to practice in the next couple weeks or a month or whenever the fuck they are, and Trey's taking all the reps and Jimmy's not there, like I don't. That's not factoring. Now if Jimmy was there on the sideline, I would say that's immediately weird. But I would not expect him to be there. If Jimmy has showed up there, and even if he's rehabbing on the side, I would say that's immediately weird.
Yeah, I think if you were the 49ers, you don't want him doing that.
Yeah. I would say I'm assuming that he's not going to show up, which I think is fair to assume. What's not fair to assume, if you're not cutting him or trading him by the time July, whatever their report date is, 28th, and whenever they step on the field, let's say I'll just pick a date, July 31st. This is their first day on the field. If Jimmy Garoppolo is walking out there with Trey Lance, that's immediately a major drag out weird situation. And also could be a reflection then of Trey. Then we got all these other variables playing in. Like, did he have a rough spring? But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt's the wrong way to describe it. I'm just giving them the spring. It's Trey's team. Jimmy's rehabbing Chicago, Florida, wherever the hell he is. I separate those two things because, their star tight end's taking the guy to the Warriors game.
A thought has occurred to me too of like, well, maybe he kind of knows he might not be ready,
right?
Or that they're a good team, like you talked about in the Super Bowl window,
right?
Where they go, damn, we still need a good backup quarterback. We need to have somebody like that. I don't want to sacrifice our team on, our young Trey Lance went down and hurt his knee, just like I saw him doing his first start last year,
sure.
Right? And then you go, oh crap. That would scare me if I'm him too. And I'm sure that might be part of the process with Garoppolo as well in their thought, where they're just going, damn, he is a great backup option, even though he's $25 million. But again, you traded 3 first.
I don't know why I'm cutting. These clips are getting cut off. I'm not blaming myself. But in any event, you heard most of it there. You traded 3 first-round picks for him. Like
you would have lit up the producer in 14 in the radio.
I would not have been able to handle that. And one more part.
How many games do you think Jimmy Garoppolo starts for the 49ers next year?
I'm going to say none. I'm going to go with none, and that at some point before training camp or around that time, they either release him or find some way to trade him. They're going to still have to pay a big portion of the contract or something. But I don't expect him to be there. I can't imagine that happening. 3 first-round picks to get a quarterback at pick number 3. Basically have pushed out the guy who took you to 2 NFC championships.
I think one theme in everything he says is you are making Trey Lance's life harder if you keep Jimmy Garoppolo around, right? And what you have to weigh is the risk of Trey getting hurt and you needing Jimmy Garoppolo to win you football games for $25 million because you couldn't trade him for anything. Is that worth the trade-off?
Yeah, I would say
and his conclusion's no, it's not.
In a vacuum, every single human, including Kyle, including George Kittle, would agree. Could I get the player Jimmy Garoppolo to be the backup for Trey Lance? Everyone would agree that's a good thing. You would want the best backup humanly possible. Not really the way football works, right? Like part of it, I ran in today at the gym, diehard Bills fan. And he was like, you see these schedules? All these, I don't know what's going on. When's this? They're already leaking. And I kind of explained it to him, like how it's slowly to Thursday. He's like, we're going to start getting all the primetime games. I'm like, yeah, you guys now get maxed out primetime games. Part of Josh Allen. He loves Josh Allen. But if Josh Allen goes down, their season's over. If Mahomes goes down, their season's over. When Russell Wilson hurt his mallet finger, they were screwed for 4 games or whatever. That's part of football. Like, it's just, you're all in on Trey Lance. So yeah, if Trey Lance gets hurt, that's a problem. And you'd say on the short sample size, he went 2.5 games and he got injured in one of them. But like, I go back to, you can't have Jimmy around, even though in theory you'd love to have him in the backup. And the old school Greg Papa in the 90s, you can do that, but you can't do that now. And Bill Walsh, quarterback, you can't talk like that now. It's too much on a 20, especially this guy is not coming from Alabama. Say one thing about like Mac and Tua. It's like, how does Tua handle Miami? I don't know. Tua was starting quarterback at Alabama for 2 years in the peak of their dynasty. Came in at halftime of a national championship. Like, in fairness to Tua, like, I bet Tua's like, it was crazier at Alabama than here's at Miami, right? North Dakota State power, it's North Dakota State. So I just think you got to get rid of them, even though in theory, if you get them to take a pay cut and still name Trey the starter, cook the books, that does make sense football-wise. It doesn't make sense personality-wise. And it would be a circus guy, because if you were at Levi Stadium, let's say the Niners are 2-2, and whoever let's just pick a team. They're playing the 5th game. They're playing the Commanders. And all of a sudden, they're 2-2, playing the Commanders week 5. And you're like, what is this team kind of like last year? What's going on? 10-10 at half, and Trey's thrown 2 picks. And Jimmy's the backup. What if you're like, fuck it, throw Jimmy in? What are we doing? It would make, no one would ever say throw Sudfeld in, or throw Brock Purdy in.
You know what could happen really quickly is you get that from fans too. Like everyone who wanted
that's what I'm saying. You and I are sitting in the stands. We'd start chanting, Jimmy. What? How would they not?
Yeah. Yep. Well, the number one priority in any year is to win a championship, but truly the number one priority for the 49ers is to give Trey Lance every piece of support and opportunity to become a franchise quarterback, given what they paid for him, right? That's the number one thing. That is everything they do. The first thing they have to think of is this good or bad for Trey Lance? Now,
well, let's just say this. They had done that trade, and they had made the NFC Championship last year, but instead of the way they made it, Jimmy had been a Pro Bowler and had thrown like 40 touchdowns and 10 picks. If you told me they're going to roll back with Jimmy, I'd have no problem. Like, yeah, it's like you got that inspired that great Jimmy. But what happened was Jimmy was just Jimmy. And it was like, oh, this is still not great. So it's been very, very easy for it to be like, yeah, we don't give a shit about Jordan Love. Because Aaron Rodgers turned back into, or even you could argue, had the greatest 2 seasons of his career. Like, you just watch him, you're like, has this guy perfected football? And it worked out perfectly for them. Did they fuck up the pick? Of course they did. If they could redo it, would they take Brandon Ayuk or something? Yes. But the result of the way it played out worked out pretty perfectly for them, right? They won however many games in 2 years. He won back-to-back MVPs, and they hosted playoff games. Now, they lost in the playoff games, but if you just said, hey, both years you're going to get home playoff games, and you're going to get your shot, you're going to be the ones, they would take that in a heartbeat. And ultimately, the 49ers would have wanted what's best for the 49ers. And in this case, they just found out, like, Jimmy's just Jimmy. Now, I think one thing we learned about him, and this is where I think he gets a lot of credit around the league, that like Baker and some of these guys are getting crushed. I think we learned a lot about his character, right? I mean, truly, like, he's a pretty high-level guy to just be able to handle the situation. And two, like, his toughness, I think I assumed he was tough. Just you got to be tough to play in the NFL. Tough. He's pretty tough, right? Like, he can. And
it was called into question a little bit when he ended the season before, sitting in the booth.
I'm probably guilty because I questioned, like, what's his deal? His toughness was clearly he was in a lot of pain, right? And he had multiple injuries. I mean, he got injured protecting another injury
Yeah.
for a team that he knows. Now they're paying him a lot of money, but he knows like he's not long for the job. So he earned a lot of respect, I think, with a lot of people, right?
Yes. Yep.
But at the end of the day, him as a player, he's just not good enough, right?
Look, almost every team that has won a championship, almost every team, not every team, but almost every team that's won a championship we could count probably on 2 hands, maybe 4 hands, the moments that could have cost them a championship. And on the other side of that coin, when you almost win, like the Niners, you could easily make the case we were so close twice with Jimmy. So how can you argue that Jimmy shouldn't be the quarterback when we got so close twice with him? And the part of that argument is, well, yeah, but you almost were not in the position you were in, right? Several things could have kept you from even getting to the NFC Championship game this year. Other things could have kept you from getting to the Super Bowl 2 years prior.
I mean, honestly, it could
So
have been it could have been 30-0 at halftime of the Rams Week 18 game. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, and the Packers game could have been a very different game. So now, not that the Packers were great. You're right. The Rams game is different. But sometimes don't make the mistake of thinking because you got the correct end result that your process was right. Don't get blinded by your success, and don't overvalue. I guess sometimes it's don't get blinded by the failures too. Sometimes coaches would say that. Like, I see this guy every day. I know his numbers aren't good, but I'm telling you, he's going to be a good player. It works both ways. And I think what you said about Jimmy is you're not talking about Trey Lance replacing one of the all-time great quarterbacks in your franchise.
What you're going to find out, though, Guy, is that 2 years ago when they went 6-10, they lost all the injuries. Did they overreact to that and make a trade for Trey Lance? Like, we don't have the information, and they might have. Because ultimately, like, they could have rolled back with Jimmy. This season would have been relatively the same. And maybe they could have ended it with Matt Ryan, right? I mean, the Colts have just slow played it, and they've ended up with Rivers and Matt Ryan. Now, they've also hit some bumps in the road, but I admire, and I think always the way to be is to kind of foot on the pedal, not foot on the brake. And I think they made the right move and the right mindset, and it was a unique quarterback draft. But they're not guaranteed to be right?
No, I mean, they've made multiple decisions. Jimmy Garoppolo is not our franchise quarterback. It's one decision. Then they had to make another decision, which was choosing between these other guys. Well, choosing to actually be aggressive for that draft, right? They could have also had a conversation about Matt Ryan or whatever.
Yeah, and the problem for them was going to be, right, like the quarterbacks that became available, I think would have been very difficult for them to do the Deshaun thing, right, in the midst of his controversy.
Well, they tried to get Stafford, couldn't get him.
That
would have been very correct of a decision.
That would have been correct. And then you think about this offseason, Russell is a no-fly zone, right? Seattle in a million years would never do that. I think Rodgers, let's say the Jimmy situation had played out, but Trey wasn't on the market, and the Niners were like, we're in the quarterback market, like who's available? And Rodgers was like going to Denver. I think Rodgers might have pushed for it, but I'd have a hard time even if the Niners would have offered 3 first-round picks that the Packers would have done that deal, right? Could you envision a scenario where the Packers trade him to retire then, Aaron? We're not trading him to the 49ers. I don't think you could do that if you're Gutekunst.
I mean, ultimately, if you were convinced Aaron wasn't going to show up, it'd be malpractice not to take 3 1s for a guy who wasn't going to show up, right?
I think it would have to get very, very ugly. I think it would have been tough.
Yeah,
I
have
still
to retire almost.
If you told me Gutekunst dropped to fire me before I traded him to the 49ers, I think
I'm not going to be the guy.
Yeah. It used to happen more in like the 80s and 90s. He's making too much. Like, it's one thing when you were making like $100,000, like 93 to be a GM. It's another thing when you're making like $3.5 million. You're like, yeah, we don't have a choice. And then you just put it on Aaron. But I still have a hard time envisioning that. But I do think Matt Ryan would have been their quarterback. Don't you?
I think Matt Ryan, if they had not done the Trey Lance and just ridden with Jimmy Garoppolo, and now Jimmy was coming off a shoulder, I think you could argue Jimmy would just be the quarterback. But yeah, the Matt Ryan thing.
If you gave Kyle right now, I don't know the answer to this. Only he truly does. If you get a do-over and just reverse it, get the picks back, and have Jimmy last year with Sudfeld or some Tyrod Taylor or some other random backup, and then have just lasted to this year with your picks and then acquired Matt Ryan instead of having Trey Lance about to take over, what would you rather do? I wonder if he would say Matt Ryan.
I wonder that too.
I don't know. Because he has looked a little older.
It's very dependent on how much he likes Trey Lance, right? If he really loves Trey Lance, then he wouldn't do that deal. And we just don't quite know yet how he feels.
Yep.
We don't really know.
I think we're really going to get some sort of feel over the next month, right? Of just him talking, Trey talking, the players talking. And it's going to lean positive, but just this is I would say a very, very intriguing OTAs of just the vibe. You know, because the expectations are high. And the vibe in offseason is always kind of light, but like I'm just fascinated with this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is it might be harder. You're going against the ones a lot more now, right? Does it look? Remember the first like 10 days where we were showing up, it was highlight reel after highlight reel.
But I mean, part of it when you have a big arm and you can run in those situations, he's gonna have highlight. He'd have highlight reel no matter what team he was playing against, right? 2s, 1s, like just when you can huck it and move.
And there's no sacks.
And the Bosa probably be training in Florida, but Hyder has to stop and you get to like run 3 more steps and unload.